Berserk is the type of show you watch if you're a real man. Your father's old school definition of a real man. A show you grow a beard to, chest haired, maybe ass hair, I don't know. Berserk has that kind of old-fashioned, archaic ideology of hardship and adversity.
I hate your guts, and that's what's gonna be left all over the mat.
You want to cry, you want to give up, but you can't, you won't, because you've seen it all before, too often. You can only keep moving on. Momentarily, we see the human side of the Berserk characters, and only briefly, for that abrupt moment, you see yourself and sympathize. As quickly as that moment came, it goes away. There isn't time to reflect or reminisce, only moving forward. That's what Berserk feels like. That's what Berserk is, a constant fight trudging onward. Everything had started out in black and white. Somewhere down the road, the line went blurry. The colors started to run, got smudged and gray. When you're in situations like those, you can only think in metaphors. Numerous concepts in Berserk very literally can't be helped due to the laws of causality. The causal chain in Berserk, known as fate, or everything that happens was destined to some extent. Guts' tragedy from its inauguration was a road of pain from the very beginning. Guts' entire life, from the moment he was born, was to some degree predetermined fate of tragedy that subsequently only becomes more pronounced as the series goes on. From birth, Guts was unironically born from his mother's corpse, perceived as a cursed demon child from the commencement. A fitting introduction for a character who, or that will be, countlessly throughout the series, be misunderstood and hurt mentally and physically. The moments when Guts shines the most is when he displays his sad yet encouraging windows of endurance and vitality, his will to keep struggling. He keeps enduring. Despite all the hostilities and unfortunate outcomes he faced, every battle he encounters and overcomes feels earned and just barely accomplishable. In the face of everything, he perseveres. This monstrous perception of Guts didn't change, but in fact grew. As the story progresses, the picture painted of Guts was one that was menacing and ruthless, while his personality and inner self was a gaping, vulnerable mess of immense sadness and sorrow. For these reasons, Guts is possibly the most sympathetic or compassionate, most real fleshed out character in manga. Fleshed out Guts?
Guts, and that's what's gonna be left all over the...
Guts is at times called the struggler, an archetype descriptor that suits him relatively well. He doesn't only struggle physically, but more so emotionally in every kind of allegorical sense of the word. Guts, after taking refuge in a mercenary group, establishes Gambino as one of his closest kind of father-like figures he would ever know, who would only teach him life by the sword, and later betray his trust by selling him off to some pedophilic comrade who would have his way with Guts. The source of Guts' anguish is this lack of love. He never had it from anyone, and in turn, Guts didn't even love himself. Throughout the narrative of Berserk, we see Guts consistently or continuously being selfless and putting himself last. It's not that he doesn't value his life, but he's in the process of discovering himself and his worth. In the early days, Guts wasn't concerned with anything but surviving and fighting, because at that age, that was the only thing he knew. Guts has a few moments of self-reflection where he voices out his inner feelings. He seldomly ever expresses them to any given person. An instance where this actually does happen is in episode 14, where Guts opens up to Casca and describes his misguided upbringing as a child. He says, "The mercenary leader who raised me taught me nothing except how to wield a sword. I've never had anything except my sword. I don't want to die. For me, this is the only reason I keep fighting. There is nothing to save myself for or give myself to. I fight because I know nothing else." Once I was willing to do just that, to commit myself to fighting and let anyone else find the reason for me. After Guts mistakenly takes the life of his father-like figure, Gambino, at a desperate attempt of self-defense, Guts flees from this mercenary group and begins a life that he would know all too well, one in solitude and isolation. Guts conceivably didn't mind his circumstances at this point because he didn't and wouldn't trust people. And as an outcome, he refused to rely on anyone. He learned from his lonely past to keep his distance, his hesitance, and the unwillingness to sincerely put faith in anyone but the only instrument that saved him several times, his sword. Accumulating or building up the courage to love and appreciate others is something that Guts knew would lead to pain and sadness when everyone eventually left him, one way or another. Guts ultimately meets Griffith and the rest of the current Band of the Hawk members, and his reluctance to accept their camaraderie is an example of Guts and his kind of disconnect or rejection of companionhood at this point. His gradual warm-up to the new mercenary group was slow and hesitation-induced. Guts was opening his heart yet again, like he vowed he wouldn't. The outcomes that later followed would prove to destroy Guts on every level, provided the recurring theme of Berserk history repeating itself. Guts' descriptor as the struggler would only reveal to be more accurate as the series progresses. Just like how Guts proclaimed that he would commit himself to fighting and let anyone else find the reason for him, he put his kind of outwardly calling to Griffith. By joining the Band of the Hawk and working alongside Griffith, Guts is given stability in his life once again. And just when I thought I didn't have enough handsome hunks in my life with long, elegant hair flourishing in the wind like majestic seahorses, we meet Griffith. After losing the initial duel to Griffith, Guts stands by his promise and follows Griffith as a leader who would give Guts purpose and ambition. Though be it temporarily and for the sake of obligation, Guts' mindset of having others find his purpose for him was a despairing mindset that over time he becomes aware of. In Berserk, everyone has some way or another a relatively linear underlining meaning associated with themselves. The blacksmith Godo, when asked why he crafts swords, gives a rudimentary reasoning explaining he does it for the sparks. The moments he becomes engulfed in the trade, lost in the instance, focusing on a singular task. Many of the members of the Band of the Hawk are like this, Griffith especially in relation to ambition and Guts to fighting and being in the art of combat. One could even argue and say that Guts is most alive only when he's near death during battle. Godo seems to be all too familiar with the concept of determination as he explains himself and his reasoning for perfecting his craft. Godo goes on to give Guts some admirable advice related to this, foreshadowing prospects of what's to come. He says, "If you desire one thing for so long, it's a given that you'll miss other things along the way. That's how it is. That's life." That's what all the people say. Riding high in April, shot down in May. Yes, Godo said it exactly like that. Throughout the series, Guts was treated mostly as a tool or as a pawn to someone else's shortcomings, dreams, or aspirations. The first time anyone ever treated him with deep compassion and empathy was Casca. While before, Guts was intently aggressive when anyone would make physical contact with him, it's a consequence of his innate signal to retaliate, a hostile sort of shell shock reaction, if you will, or belligerence lashed out as an outcome of his childhood traumas. Casca was the first person to break through his defenses. She saw Guts as this torn person with a distressing past, much like herself, congregated by the unity of the Band of the Hawk. While it may have taken some general uncooperation and refusal, they both apprehend that they're more similar rather than contrasting. Probably no other woman would be as appealing to Guts the way Casca is, due to her strong, robust, composed disposition. But depressingly enough, even the very notable aspects of attraction and respect Guts sees in Casca is something that gets eventually taken away from him. Guts' former abuse and problematic relationships lead him to be declined to show any kind of feelings. And at his most intimate moments with Casca, Guts realizes that he can rely more than just on his sword, but on another person as well, Casca. Through the help of Casca, Guts comes to accept that he isn't the only one who's suffering, and learns to share his burden. He learns that there are others who feel the same way he does, who have gone through the same sort of circumstances, and he overcame a part of his suffering as a result. Guts was shown through Casca by exchanging trust, compassion, and love. Now, this wouldn't be a proper analysis if we didn't get into a little bit of philosophy. So let's describe this phenomenon in a pompous, eloquent manner, shall we? I want to compare this realization Guts had with Friedrich Nietzsche, themology and the birth of tragedy. A great German philosopher, Nietzsche describes or advocates the culture of Dionysus. In Dionysus, a man discovers that his existence or being was not restricted to his individual experiences alone, and because of this, a way was found to escape the fate of all men, which was death. In Friedrich's argument regarding the suffering of the Greeks, he explains he comprehends their pain and devises a manner to overcome tragedy. Ancient Greece was shit. There was constant wars, disease was rampant, strict rules and principles, rules and regulations provided an unbalance among many citizens, that is. Dionysus offered real salvation from suffering, and not in the typical sense of worship your Greek god kind of way, but by absorbing an individual in the grand community of the unconscious. Primal unity, Nietzsche called it. Man found liberation from his individual fate, joined as he was to the souls of many others. Existential suffering is a byproduct of a person who thinks they are suffering alone, and as a result can see no meaning in existence. Dionysus shows man that he is part of a collective unconscious that feels the same way, and in this unity he finds resolve, and allows himself to grow past his suffering. Guts' growth as a character is most pronounced during this intimate moment with Casca and at the end of the Golden Age arc. When Guts' thinking begins to shift and he starts looking past his sword. As Guts builds his relations with the Band of the Hawk, he falls into a cycle of contentment, something he subconsciously never wanted. He fought for others, for their livelihood, for their dreams and ambitions, and never thought about his own. The moment Guts overhears Griffith's speech is the catalyst that alters his perception about himself and his overall purpose, and can be considered a crucial driving force of Guts. Due to Guts' horrendous circumstances, he constantly concerns himself with living and never aspiring to do anything. He never wanted to accomplish anything or make something of himself. The break point was hearing Griffith's words that night. The speech opened Guts' eyes and made him reflect on what he wanted, what his dreams were. Guts listens to Griffith voice out that a true friend never relies on another's dream. A person with the potential to be my friend must be able to find his reason for life without my help. And he would have to put his heart and soul into protecting his dream. He would never hesitate to fight for his dream, even against me. For me, a true friend is one who stands equal on those terms. However you may feel towards Griffith at this point, he was right, and his words dug deep for Guts. Death is inevitable. Our fear is what makes us play safe, blocks out emotion. It's a losing game. Without passion, you're already dead. Guts has said it before that he would rather fight for his life rather than live it. Not only does Guts realize that Griffith detests his lifestyle, but also Guts comes to accept the real divide between him and the man he so once admired. Griffith will not acknowledge anyone as a friend until they are his equal on all heights, a man of their own. History repeats itself and Guts leaves the Band of the Hawk, once again reestablishing an isolated and lone lifestyle. Guts used to swing his sword for others. Well, after hearing those words from Griffith, he journeys on an existential quest and only swings his sword to find his purpose. The day he parted with the Hawks, he duels Griffith for the second time to nullify the contract they had established prior, stating that Guts belongs to Griffith. Guts continuously throughout the series displays a high level of arrogance and misunderstanding of others. Certainly his past has all to do with it. He feels as though leaving, finding himself, was the next best thing to do. Guts doesn't at this time realize implications of his departure. Guts' inability to recognize and value what he had compounded with Griffith's own sort of dependable facade made it impossible for Guts to understand how much Griffith needed him, or what he meant to the Band of the Hawk. He isn't able to see how his absence might affect Griffith, and how his friends' self-destructive tendencies might bring ruin to his allies. This is Goto's foreshadowing tale of Guts adventuring off in search of his purpose, of what's most important to him. Well, in the face of arrogance, it was already in front of him. Guts goes on to search for what really matters to him. His dream. What the hell? His dream. The sad yet ironic thing about Guts' journey is that he didn't know what he had until it was either gone or taken away from him. A reoccurring theme in Berserk. A theme in contest to this can be the duality of vulnerability and relationships. A keystone in the decisions Guts makes. For the better or worse, the more we grow close to individuals, the more they gain power to hurt us and change the course of our lives forever. How these particular individuals react to this duality is what makes them either human or monster. The apostles were once people who chose to give up their humanity at the most vulnerable moment in their lives. Yet no one symbolizes this theme of loss and vulnerability more than Guts. But he is determined to keep living, fighting, and to carry his burden with him despite everything that's happened. The moments that take place after the reunion of the Band of the Hawks, and eventually Griffith after they rescue him, of course, this series at this point is demonstrating that Guts is changing. He's more accepting, compliant, and understanding towards others, reunite with his old members and help his old comrades. It's more optimistic now. We are treated to this journey that gives us hope to the viewer, that perhaps after reuniting with former allies, everything will go back to the way things used to be, the moments that Guts cherished most. The way things turned out in reality, however, were just cruel. A climax in Guts' life that parallels his past tragedies and exceeds them. A concentration of brutal sadness and agony so high only Guts could endure. The Eclipse. I say it's a parallel of Guts' past because the Eclipse was, in a way, a repeat of his previous traumas he had endured. The way that Guts was held down or pinned down, forced down by the demons while watching the woman he loved be raped before him was akin to how Donovan pinned Guts down while he raped him, in the same sense that how he would have looked up to Gambino before he betrayed his trust. Now Griffith filled that place as the man who he so once idolized and craved approval from. Griffith was now highlighted in the same kind of light, a monster taking almost everything Guts ever had away from him. The course of causality were once again being repeated itself in this horrific, gruesome moments Guts had to go through were being relived once again and tenfold. Everything reverts back to its initial horror. There are no choices, nothing but a straight line. The illusion comes afterwards when you ask yourself, why me? Or what if? When you look back and see the branches, like a pruned bonsai tree or forked lightning. If you had done something different, it wouldn't be you, it would be someone else looking back, asking a different set of questions. This was Guts' outcome to everything. His actions, the turn of events led up to this singular moment. In a nightmare, every choice you make is the wrong one. At this point, it seemed like every day was a nightmare for Guts. That is, after he was given the brand of sacrifice, he was the very embodiment of sympathy and heroic perseverance after surviving through the eclipse. Born on a corpse, raised by mercenaries who cared nothing for him, being mentally, physically, and sexually abused, seen only as a tool or plaything. Then, after building up a trusted relationship and camaraderie with a new group, whose leader is later revealed to see him in the very same way, a tool, an unequal, and a fool for living a life without a purpose. His loss and sorrow is a very literal personification of Guts, at this time. His missing arm, his eye, heavily scarred face and body evoke our sympathy and speak of great sacrifices of battle he's gone through. Notwithstanding all that he's lost, he doesn't stop, but instead he keeps persevering. That's what makes Guts so great. Now, with the brand of sacrifice, Guts needed to keep his distance from people, not only for his sake, but for theirs as well. To assure their safety, his life would be a battle day in and day out. A true struggler. This hopeless losing battle is now Guts' life, but he endures and keeps finding a reason to move forward. The consequential events that take place after the eclipse is merely the beginning of Guts' journey of struggling and his tenacity. Guts is and has always been a struggler. While before his purpose was undetermined, through the years it seems like Guts has developed a sense of identity and has his own inherent dreams and purpose he seeks to accomplish or see to the end. Now he has those to care for, to protect. The journey isn't anymore so a lone struggler just getting by, but a congregation of friends and comrades working alongside each other, bettering each other in the process. With Guts, now, the central figure of the group, a leader of his own.